Thanks, Jake. And thank you all. I'm glad you could be here today in person. I'm glad we could be here in person. I didn't know last week how things were going to work. You know, I was telling Jake earlier, we were here a year ago, and then Perry and I had another session a week later where we were in Bovina, I think it was. And since then, it just hadn't worked out. We hadn't been able to go to any of the churches and visit people. We've talked with people over the phone, same as everybody else. You just have to find new ways of connecting with people. So it's great to be here and be able to talk. I do want to thank you very much for the partnership that you have with us in the Brazil church planting work. And I can honestly say that I've been personally impacted by the things you guys are doing here at this church, and that's having an impact on what we do at Brazil. So it's a positive thing that you guys are doing, and I appreciate that. So 2020, the year God showed the world who's really in control. Who knew this time last year that in a couple of weeks, no sporting events, can't go out to eat, can't gather in your church, financial markets in trouble? Who knew? And then on top of that, we've had more hurricanes than they ran out of letters. They had to start doubling up. Had wildfires, had floods. I have to ask, are we paying attention to the message that God's sending? How did the churches in Brazil do? Well, it looked a lot like here. Mask, distancing. Oh, that's not coming up too good. This is basically people gather in somebody's garage patio area, and they're all spread out, and they're wearing their mask. Sound familiar? Hand sanitizer. So when I went to Brazil in December, I got to go back. Nearly every business you go in, they've got this little stand here. And you come up and you press it with your foot to get your hand sanitizer out. I thought, okay, there's a neat invention. I have never seen that anywhere in the United States. You have to push it with your hand, and who knows who else's hand was pushing on that. So there you go. Interesting things. And some of them fared better than others. We'll talk about that a little bit. But one of the things that struck me very early on was a quote from a fairly famous preacher. And he said at the end of the COVID crisis, every church in America, and I will add, in Brazil, will have the veneer pulled back, and it's going to be clear who we are. Are we somebody that's just a social group for Sunday? And we're more worried about when can we get back together and do the things we used to do? Or are we going to get out and be the hands and feet of Christ? And I think that's true. Unfortunately, not all the churches have done as well as others. My job is to talk about a couple of good ones today. So just to remind you, we're in a state in Brazil called Minas Gerais. It's about the same size as Texas. Ricardo told me the other day, it's bigger than Texas. I need to go validate that. But it's about the same size as Texas, pretty close. 19 million people. The capital is Belo Horizonte. The metropolitan area has about 6 million people in it. And then, and there's quite a few churches here that have been established through the years by the missionaries and by the Brazilians. And then there's Juiz de Fora, Uberlândia, Montes Claros that we know have churches, and we're still working to get a church established in Governador Valadares. Interesting thing, the last 3 or 4 trips I've been trying to get over there and visit that city. Every time something comes up. So we're just waiting for the right timing, and then we'll get to go visit that city and figure out what we need to do there. I want to talk about Beijing quite a bit today, and Uberlândia over here on the west. Beijing's a suburb of Belo Horizonte. It's a pretty good sized city in its own right. Their response, they went to online services pretty quickly. I don't know whether you can see, this is fairly early on, but they got their computer and there's a phone up there so they can stream stuff. And I put the name up here. If you're interested, you can go into Facebook. type in Beijing Igreja de Cristo, and you can find their Facebook page, and you can practice your Portuguese. You'll recognize probably the tune of some of the songs, and some you won't. There's been quite a few songs that have been written in Brazil for Brazilians, but there's also, they've taken some of the ones that we know and converted them over. So if you'll go look that up. And similar to other churches, when they went online, they actually were reaching a broader audience than just their own members. They had people from various places in Brazil that were listening in, even the United States, even as far as Mozambique in Africa, which is a Portuguese-speaking nation, were watching their sermons. So that's pretty neat, and that's been one of the benefits, if you can call it, out of the pandemic, is people's churches are getting a broader reach now. They also started, the disciple groups that they had started using were very effective. So what's a disciple group? Glad you asked. We introduced the concept in November of 2019, and the idea is that you've got 3 or 4 men or 3 or 4 women that are meeting regularly. They meet for prayer. They're looking to discover what God's Word has to say and then apply that to their lives. Some of them use what we call Discovery Bible Study. There's also another couple of options there that they can use. And then there's a mutual accountability, and they're basically sharing life together. The goal is to help them to mature as Christians, and it's a move to start moving from our knowledge-centric heritage to actually starting to apply what you learn and make the changes in your life. And that's why we talk a little bit about accountability. I know accountability for some folks is a bad word, but used appropriately, it's part of our everyday life. If you're in a business and the boss tells you something to do, he's going to come back and check and make sure that you got it done. That's being accountable. That's just part of living life. So Beijing actually, during the pandemic, this was actually very helpful for their congregation. They got up to 14 groups that are right now operating, and because they're just 3 or 4 people, they can get together whenever they want. It doesn't have the same restrictions as you have for the church meetings. And that's been very helpful. They've also, between Giovanni and the school and this church, they've introduced this concept to a number of other congregations. And of course, people have been starved over this last year for a way to get together, and it's been quite helpful to those congregations. At the first of the year of this year, the Beijing congregation has undertaken a project to take their auditorium and they're basically converting it into 6 classrooms. Their dream is to be able to offer a primary school to the community and use that as a way to serve people and, of course, meet the families that are associated with that. And so they're building those classrooms in their auditorium, and they're moving the auditorium basically straight up 1 floor, so it'd be about the same size, and they're just building that out. They see this as a good time because there are restrictions on meeting and they're not able to use their auditorium as much right now. They have started, all of this is done so far with their own funds. Their members have been volunteering to help. They've had a couple of apprentice stonemasons, which is important because everything they build down there is concrete and bricks, kind of like our cinder blocks, but they're made out of clay instead of whatever cinder blocks from cinder are made out of. So they're getting started on that process. They would appreciate if anybody would like to help. They would appreciate some help so they can get finished quicker. But it is something that's moving forward. Our Institute of Evangelism, the Charlie Huffman Institute of Evangelism, this time last year, they had to move to Skype. And in that process, about 4 students had to drop out. A couple of them because they just didn't have sufficient internet infrastructure at their house, and a couple of them because they needed to find a way to provide for their family. And so, but we graduated 18 students in December. And then normally we would have started the next class, the next 2-year class by now. But because of the pandemic, we've shifted that out to August. And so what we're doing in the meantime is we're looking to take a step back. We're looking at our curriculum and making some improvements there. We'd like to get a little bit more emphasis on spiritual disciplines, helping them learn how to pray better and to be better students, but also maybe some fasting, some solitude, the standard disciplines that people have practiced through the centuries. Put more emphasis on making of disciples that are able to make disciples, and to add more practical application. The Institute started with a fair amount of time spent for practical application, but over the years that's kind of dwindled down, and so we want to revitalize that. And one of the things that's always been a challenge there is having the funds to go someplace and do things. And so we're taking some of the funds that we have now and putting them into an activity fund to give us a way to help pay for trips, pay for transportation and lodging and food and things like that when they're doing activities. Our staff, we're looking to beef up our staff a little bit. Ever since 2 years ago, one of our staff members was killed in a traffic accident. We've been needing to replace him. One of our other staff members through the course this last year has taken a job to help better support his family. And while he's still taught this past year, it's put some strain. So we need to beef that up. We need to have a little more dedicated resources, and we'll probably need some additional funds as we do that. And we'll be looking at how we allocate all that out over the course of the next few months. And then we just want to kind of spruce up some of the administrative things and beat that up a little bit. When I was there in December, we talked about, okay, what is the desired outcome of our institute? So after 2 years, what do we want the disciples to be like? Well, we want them to be disciples. In other words, it's their lifestyle. We want them to be disciples that can make disciples, and those disciples can make disciples. So kind of like what 2 Timothy 2:2 talks about. We want them to be strong in prayer. We want them to be empowered by the Holy Spirit. We want them to love and to serve with purpose. We want them to practice relationship-based evangelism. So a lot of times we just go hand out flyers and we assume that's going to bring somebody, but move to more of meeting people and meeting their needs. Understand as part of the love and serve with purpose is a way to meet the people, and from that start the process of evangelism. We want them to be disciplined spiritually and physically, and to know the heart and the mind of God through Scripture. When I go in March, Lord willing, and the virus don't rise, we'll spend more time talking about how these desired outcomes, how the classes that we've been teaching, how the classes that we want to add will help us to meet these desired outcomes for our students. And I want to point out the love and serve with purpose. You guys have had an influence on that. So as I've heard how you guys are loving and serving your community, that's had an impact on me. And that's part of the reason that statement's on that list, is because I see that is how a church ought to be operating. And you guys are modeling that. I appreciate that in you guys. Okay, I mentioned Uberlândia on the west side of the state. We have 2 families there, Celio and Carol, and Delmiro and Regina. And then we have 2 primary congregations in this city. It's a city of 680,000 people. The 2 congregations, both couples work with both congregations. So one will meet in the morning, Aurora meets in the morning, and the City Garden meets in the evening. And it's working out well for them both to work with both congregations. Last year, between these 2 congregations, they had 18 baptisms, which is in spite of the pandemic. They were continuing to press on. I've got time. This is, it's a little bit hard to see this picture, but this is Hernanes. And you can kind of tell they had to carry him in to the baptistry, and because he can't walk. Del Miro sent me the story about Hernanes. He was a healthy young man at one point, and then for some mysterious reason, he started getting very unhealthy. He ended up in the hospital. He was on a feeding tube. This was before the start of the pandemic, so it wasn't related to COVID in any way. They finally determined that it was a form of HIV was causing this problem. They got him well enough that he could go back to his home, but he was still on a feeding tube. He was not healthy at all. He basically spent all his time in bed. Not too long after that, his wife left him and took his young son with him. He was very disappointed, very depressed, as you can imagine. His mom is a member of one of the congregations, and one day Del Miro was over studying with his brother, and Hernanes hadn't been able to speak for quite some time. But while Del Miro was studying with his brother, Hernanes turned on his side and said, "I want to be baptized." And that's the first thing he said in a long time. And but because he's still on feeding tube, it was very dangerous for them to try to baptize him. So they prayed a lot over him, and over the course of a couple of months, he got to be well enough. He got off the feeding tube and got to the point where they could take him to the church and carry him up and baptize him in the baptistry. And so that's quite a miracle that he's recovered to the point. And they're continuing to work with him at his home. The church is helping to pay for some of his physical therapy so that he can hope to improve and eventually return to church. The Aurora Congregation meets in well, it was built to be a bar, a storefront, and they've got about 45 members. 6 of the baptisms that I just talked about were in this congregation last year. And you can see with the pandemic, as they've spread out, the attendance is down a little bit, but they're still kind of a standing room only. They have people that are meeting outside into the street, which is fine when it's nice weather. It's a little bit harder when it's rainy weather. And so they have a desire for this congregation that they'd like to get their own building. The congregations had a piece of land across town in a part of town that the church has not developed in. And so they're in the process, even this week, of paying off that land and getting it sold to somebody. They have the funds to get it paid for, and they have somebody that's willing to buy it that's going to give them some cash on hand. And so the goal is we looked at some lots when I was there in December. We'll look again in March when I go. The next step will be to find a nice lot in the Aurora neighborhood. This neighborhood of the city is growing fairly rapidly. There's several new housing developments that are going up, a lot of people starting to move in, and there's some good real estate available there. So the next step will be to get that lot, and then we'll start the process of, over the years, or however much time it takes to get a nice building built for this congregation so that they can continue to expand and grow in this area. So one other area I want to talk about this morning is English Without Borders. So back in June, I started having Zoom meetings with 2 young ladies from Uberlândia that are pretty good with their English. And the goal was to say, we're going to practice our English. We're going to use a Discovery Bible study. We're going to practice English doing a Bible study. It's similar to what Let's Start Talking and some other things do. But this is, again, focused on a discovery-based process. And so the idea was that they could invite their friends that want to practice their English. And so we started doing that. And those went very well. Sabelli is one of those young ladies. And she invited her brother, Cesar. This is Cesar and Christina and their son Jonas. And Cesar is a very interesting person. He and Christina, he's trained as a pharmacist and a nurse. Christina was a practicing medical doctor. And they had worked up in the northeast part of Brazil for 20 years, something like that. And over the course of the last 10 or so, they have planted 7 churches and houses in various areas up in the northeast of Brazil. And their dream was to be able to work full-time for the Lord. And so they saved up their money. They lived on less. And about 18 months ago, they walked away from their careers, quite successful careers, and started working full-time. So they went to Panama and got permanent residency there and worked some in Panama. Then they came up to the United States to visit some people and interact. And a year ago, they got caught by the pandemic. And they weren't able, so they were able to get to Mexico City and stay with their sister. And that's about the time that they got invited to participate in this study. Well, he invited so many people in the first study that we split him off after a week or two to their own group. And this is kind of what's happened in the meantime. So this is me. I invited Sabelli. Sabelli invited Cesar. Cesar's invited Almir. Almir invited Eric. Eric is invited. Anyway, it's gone crazy. It's gone crazy. And it's just been amazing to see where God has taken this. This has gone, he was in Mexico City, we're in Amarillo. It's gone to, we've had people from Texas, from Tennessee, from Maine, Georgia, Illinois, Nebraska. And then in Brazil, it's gone from Rio, Aracruz, Pedro Segundo, Sao Paulo, Anchieta, Salvador. There's just been people from all over that have come in. And some of them are members of the church. Some of them are members of Baptist church. Some of them are well, for example, we have a young lady named Natalia who's Catholic, but not really, nominally a Catholic. And it's been amazing to watch her open up in these studies and to be interested. When I got to visit in December, I actually got to pass through Rio for a little bit, and there were tears in her eyes. She was just so thankful that we've had this process. It's the same thing. People want the togetherness, the sharing, but they also have been very interested in learning about the Bible. Eric's brother, so Eric was a member of the International Church of Christ for some years, and now he's kind of stepped away from that. They're having church in their house, but his brother had been turned off by the behavior of Eric, and he basically told Eric, he invited him to come to this study and practice his English. He said, well, I don't have anything to do with the Bible. I don't want to touch the Bible, but I do kind of want to practice my English. And so he started coming, and over the course of time, he's been one of our more faithful members, except for the last few weeks where he's been having some headaches and hasn't been able to participate. But it's been interesting to watch him go from, I don't care, I don't want to have anything to do with the Bible, to now he's a very good participant. And he's sharing this with his friends. And so it's just amazing what God has been able to do through this process. Cesar, in the meantime, is not content with just English Without Borders. He started one called Spanish Without Borders that's helping Portuguese people that want to practice their Spanish, which is important to him since he's living in Panama. They've started one called Basic English, which has actually been much more popular because people like the idea of coming and practicing their English with an American, but they're also embarrassed about their English skills. And just like I would be very embarrassed with my Portuguese skills. So they're much more likely to come and say, well, we're just kind of trying to learn English together. And they're using songs. So they'll use a Christian song, they'll play it in English, and then they'll talk about those words. And of course, music is a good way to learn a language. And so that group, the WhatsApp group, has over 50 people in it. And they've got 3 meetings that they have every Saturday afternoon with different people. Cesar's, he's also met with each of his church leaders back in the house churches that he started and introduced these concepts to them. He has he talked with his friend, I forgot Ivan. His friend Ivan in Salvador. And Ivan had a contact with this guy named Gaspar in Mozambique. Gaspar has 150 people that he's studying with. So now they're starting to use this technique and approach in Mozambique. And Cesar's being a help to that as well. So it's just hard to stop this guy. He's amazing. What? And Jonas is, so the 3 sessions they do, Christina leads one, Cesar leads one, and Jonas leads one. And out of that session that Jonas is leading, one of the young women is like 12 or 13, and she wanted to start one with her own friends. And so now it's starting to spread. So all of this we're doing as a way to try to reach people. And the next step is, okay, how do we then turn that into a Bible study that's taking place in native language and kind of get the Americans out of the picture so they can really concentrate on the message and a little bit less on practicing their English. One of the things Cesar is doing to help do that is he's using WhatsApp now. WhatsApp is it's a texting application that is ubiquitous outside of the United States. Everybody uses it. It's free. You can make phone calls over it. You can do up to 8 people in a video call. It doesn't cost people anything, so they don't have to have an internet connection like they need to do a Zoom call or a Google Meet call. And so it's starting to take off as a way for these studies to start to happen. And so Cesar's helping to take this to the next level. Now, I don't know whether you can see here, but we have some celebrities that actually participate on Thursday nights with us. And I did actually want to give them a moment and see if they want to share any thoughts. If I hand this over to... You want to talk a little bit about your experiences with the Thursday night sessions?
But it's really it's so easy to do. Clay can send you, if you're interested in that, Clay can send you a link on Thursdays, and all you do is click on it, and then you're connected just like that, and you can just discuss the Bible with them for an hour and a half, and it's really a good experience.
Because part of the process is not just the Bible study, but we talk about what are you thankful for, what is the challenge you're facing. We end with some prayer time. And it's we know these people. They're our friends now. And it's been good. Okay, we're about out of time. Last slide. "2020 has been a challenging year. But I'm here to say God wasn't surprised. He may have been a little disappointed. He may have been a little frustrated. He may have been a little bit hurt with the way we behaved, but he wasn't surprised. And God has a plan, even though our plans all fall apart or can fall apart. in a matter of days. God has a plan, and He's willing to work with those of us who are willing to work with Him. I appreciate the work you guys are doing here in Canadian and the work that you're enabling to happen in Guatemala, in Chile, and in Brazil, and in Tulsa, and helping those students go. I didn't mention one of the students that's up there. One of the people that participates in that first group is a former AIM student. And she's invited because she knew one of the young, anyway, it's a long story. But I'm just grateful that God's letting me play a part. And I'm grateful for you guys for helping to enable that and the part that you guys are playing in the story of God. And I commend you in that and encourage you to keep up the good work.